did one of because quite small.
We start?
Well, I think we're live. So, hello again, everyone. Thank you very much for coming. We are live again at the Politico Pub. Gather round if you can, because we everyone bunched up the back last time, so you have to be a bit more friendly this time and come down. It's all right. He's not Pat McFadden. He can't hurt you.
I've never hurt anybody yet,
Yeah,
as far as I know.
So we are here in the Politico Pub on the first night. It does actually look like an actual pub. We have lights. Is that a chandelier? No.
Yeah, it's a chandelier.
It's a chandelier. Why not?
Of course it is.
We have a Houses of Parliament division bell, you know, because it says Houses of Parliament division bell. Does it actually go off?
Yes.
When we have it?
The
Yeah,
heads are
why
nodding.
not? Yeah,
Heads
sure.
are nodding.
We have a dartboard. We had the football on earlier, and of course we have a free-flowing amount of free beer. And we have Jack Blanchard, who is over here from the US.
Hello. Thank you. I've never done an event in a pub, I don't think, before. This is great fun. Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Well, we had to get you all the way back to Britain to do it. So,
Yes.
yeah.
Yes, and I do have a beautiful suit and gorgeous shoes that my airline has lost somewhere over the Atlantic, which is why I'm here in dressed down American style rather than good British tailoring. Can only apologise for that. It may turn up at some point during the interview, perhaps.
Well, for an American tech executive, you are right at home.
Yes,
so,
exactly,
yes.
exactly.
Jack, of course, was the founder of London Playbook 8 years ago, something like that.
Yeah.
Did the Burning the Midnight Oil and much worse for 3 years. Did many other things and went over to DC. About nearly a year ago now, right? January, I think it was.
Yes, my first day was January the 20th, which was President Trump's inauguration day.
Fantastic.
So it's been a quiet news cycle since then for me.
Yeah.
And I write the DC version of Playbook 4 mornings a week over there, which has been a experience, as you can imagine. I've been a journalist in the UK for 20 years before that. This is the first time I've worked dedicated in the US, so it's been eye-opening to see how that's worked so far.
So I have not many questions, but one of them is, can you just tell us what's actually going on in Washington? Like, what is it actually like over there?
I mean, it's insane, right? I mean, of course. I mean, Washington has never seen anything like what's happened to it over the last 8 or 9 months. You know, the city feels almost in a state of shell shock sometimes, particularly at the start when Elon was in the White House and he was axing away big parts of government and they were disappearing overnight. Thousands of people were thinking they were losing their jobs overnight. Never quite clear how many of them really lost their jobs or not, but it certainly felt like that at the time. And the thing that you don't realise about DC, if you're over here in Britain, is that it's really a one-industry town. It's like an old coal mine town or something. Everyone works in the same game. And so when something like that happens, it reverberates through the city. And then, of course, on top of that, we had what happened in the summer when they sent the troops in. And again, it's added an extra level of, how can I put it, pizzazz to the city, if you like. It feels like a city in a slight sense of turmoil, which, of course, is difficult for lots of people living there, but absolutely fascinating if you're a journalist there to cover it, and especially one who's come from outside like I have, and you get a slightly different perspective to if you've been covering DC for 20, 30 years like some of my colleagues have.
I was going to say, what's it like coming in and starting on Inauguration Day and only getting the after and not the before picture, where like you sort of, all these people are like shell-shocked and trying to work out what's going on, and you're like, this is just what the world is like.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we all follow American politics anyway, right? So you're never really coming to American politics cold. I've been a student of American politics my whole life, really, but it's still different once you're parachuted right into it and you're seeing it up close. And yeah, it's certainly, we're very conscious that this is, you're there at a very, not just interesting time, but historic time, not just for DC, but for America. This is clearly one of the most consequential presidencies, modern history, maybe in all of history, and that's very apparent when you're there and you're dealing with it up close on a day-to-day level. Jaws drop in DC every day, just like they drop over here when you see what's happened next or what the president's doing now. Like, it's so much of it is unprecedented, so much of it feels historic and important, and you're very conscious of that as a journalist, just like you would be as a punter watching on TV.
What's it like, trying to write a morning newsletter where the president can just tear it up, shall we say.
He does that. He does that. He goes on his social media at bedtime and just breaks the news cycle at midnight with his thumbs, and you have to start again. And that's all part of the magic of covering Donald Trump's White House. I mean, when I was doing Playbook over here in London, Donald Trump was president then. It was like 2017, 18, those years. It was during his first term. And he used to do it to me then. I mean, you know, I remember him, you know, going after Theresa May once in the middle of the night, and you're like, okay, delete everything, let's start again, the world's just gone crazy. That happens all the time to me now, and that's just part of the fun. The flip side to that is there's never nothing to write about. There's never a boring day. You're never there going, oh, what am I going to put in Playbook this morning? It's like, what am I going to leave out of Playbook this morning? Because so many of these different storylines feel so consequential and so unusual and so fascinating to our audience that you've got to write about them, you know?
And how much is it? Because from over here, right, it looks completely like the cult of Donald, because that is the, you know, we see everything through what the president is doing with his thumbs or with his like 90-minute press conferences or whatever. Like, is it like that over in Washington as well? Like, or is there kind of more of movement building beyond it, the MAGA movement, if you like, where it's kind of devolving past just being the president?
It's still, a lot of it is still him. He's such a magnet for attention. He's such a magnet for news, and he's in the way that he delivers news and the way he puts himself at the front of centre of every story, whether it's a massive policy announcement that he'll just make off the cuff, sitting in a press conference that wasn't even meant to happen, but he's just decided to invite the press in again for the third time that day. Or whether it's some corporate row about some company changing its logo. No, the president's just going to wade into that as well, and suddenly that's a political story, and I'm having to learn about this, you know, this company and why this is a really significant cultural issue he's decided to take up. So it's very hard to get away from, and traditionally in America, I mean, constitutionally in America, there are 3 co-equal branches of government. We don't feel like that at the moment. You know, Congress has essentially cleared the pitch for him. He has it completely under control. That's never really happened before. And the Supreme Court is much more independent than liberals would give it credit for, but nevertheless is allowing him to do much more than has happened in the past. And so he is this enormous presence across all types of story, and there is a huge MAGA movement underneath, and they have huge media characters who in their own bubble are enormous figures, but nothing comes close to Trump, nothing.
Who does it better, do you think, in the old press conference style? You've got one extreme, shall we say, you've got Donald Trump, and then maybe at the other you have Keir Starmer.
Yeah, it's weird that, isn't it? The one thing I was sure about when Donald Trump won the election is that relationship is going to be a complete disaster. Like, these two people are so different in every way. Like, you know what Keir's like, you know, straightforward guy, but, you know, very understated, very managerial. We all know it. You know what Donald Trump's like. They are polar opposites. I was like, that is going to be a car crash. And the journalist in me is like, sweet, that's going to be really interesting to watch how that happens. And in fact, Starmer, and I'm not just saying that because he was in the pub before watching the football, he's handled it incredibly well. It's one of the biggest achievements, I would say, of his premiership so far. As a journalist, to answer your actual question, Donald Trump every time, because Donald Trump does media every single day. There is no world leader who is more accessible than Donald Trump. Nowhere on the planet, not even the smallest country, has a leader who pop up and do essentially a press conference every single day in his office. And Donald Trump does that. You know, there was a week when he didn't do any media for like 6 days. The internet thought he died. It genuinely thought he died because he did nearly a week without doing any media. It's like, you should see my country. The Prime Minister will disappear for months. And like, that's normal. He just loves it. And for all the criticism that he gets, some of it rightly, for the way he deals with the media, that is, I think, really impressive. And especially, to be blunt, you know, he's not the youngest guy. The energy level to take that on every day is extraordinary. And obviously, as a journalist, you appreciate it because he gets asked the difficult questions every single day, and he's quite happy to answer them in his aggressive, robust, sometimes quite unpleasant to the journalist, but, you know, who cares? We're not all as thin-skinned as some. Like, he's there, and he's taking it. And
I was going to say, he's not that accessible to the AP or the various journalists he's banned for, you know, doing nasty things.
They did a particular thing with AP that was, in my view, deeply wrong, but it wasn't like he banned the rest of the press pack. He was still taking those questions every day, and AP are now back in the room.
Yeah. So is there a concept in DC of like Britain having done well? You know, like you say, like Keir Starmer's done really well, or do they just kind of not really notice us because we're this little island? Like, where does it sit?
Definitely, they notice less than you realise when you're in the UK covering it, that's for sure. But you've got to appreciate, the domestic stories there are so big and so new and so important to people in America. They haven't really got the capacity to be spending too much time thinking about other countries and how their relationships are with the president, because he's just sent the troops into here, or he's just decided he's going to get this talk show host taken. I mean, you can imagine, people's capacity for all different levels of story is limited and finite. That said, for people that do follow that stuff, absolutely appreciated that Keir Starmer has done a very good job of befriending the president. And even when Elon Musk, who really took against Keir Starmer in quite an unpleasant way and was daily going after him, if you remember that period early in the presidency, and Elon Musk at that time was very close to the president, Trump just ignored him. And when he'd frequently get asked the question, what do you think about, what Elon said about Starmer, he'd always say, I really like Keir Starmer. And I think that's, I guess, testament to Starmer, also to a degree to Peter Mandelson, RIP. And I think, probably the Prime Minister should get credit for that.
How do you think it's going to end? Because, I mean, it's impressive in itself, isn't it, that this has lasted 9 months without crashing and burning, right? Do you think it does crash and burn, or do you think he'll be able to, keep it up?
I don't see what crashing and burning would look like, to be honest. I mean, there's no mechanism where, you can see the Prime Minister's under pressure here. People talk about, will he last till the next election? Obviously, I don't know, but, mechanisms happen here. Prime Ministers are forced out. We saw it enough with the Tories. That doesn't happen. And he has such control over the power centres in DC that, no, I don't see how would he crash and burn. What would that really mean? He's very popular with his own supporters. He hasn't got another election to win after this, and he's delivering almost everything that he promised he was going to do.
I mean, the Keir relationship, does that crash and burn?
That?
Yeah.
It's very hard to say with Donald Trump. He does dramatically fall out with people sometimes. Of course, we've seen that with Elon Musk, but I don't think so at the moment. He's never even questioned it. If he really likes the guy, he's bought the Keir juice. So I don't think there's any evidence at all that would happen. I guess that, as we get closer to a British election, if Nigel Farage is still the prime candidate going up against Keir Starmer, and that Trump-Farage relationship is real, obviously that brings a different dynamic into it, and I suppose it's possible that it would start to change then, but that feels like a long way off, and I just don't really think Donald Trump cares that much about who wins the next UK election anyway. Why would he?
Actually, what do you make of what's going on in the UK? When you left the UK, things were sort of going along. There were a couple of number 10 scandals. I think the Sue Gray she probably was out by the time you left, and there were a few problems, but now you've come back and they're this far behind in the polls, and you've got talk about replacing the PM and all this stuff. What's a new American's eye view of this thing?
Well, it's sort of not the rise of a populist right movement in the shape of reform is kind of the least surprising thing that's ever happened if you just took one step back and watched it happening everywhere around the world. The idea that somehow Britain would be immune to what is obviously a massive political force that is not bound by one nation didn't make any sense. So, and Nigel Farage is an incredibly talented politician, as we've seen, very effective politician. It's, if you take two steps back, of course that would happen. It's surprising to see Labour apparently struggling as much as they are, although it was pretty obvious, I was here at the time, that they didn't have a very serious plan for government when they won the election, and that has obviously proved to be pretty disastrous. But I think the bigger themes are very familiar to me. It's not just America, you look at Europe as well, governments like this are getting panned, and parties like Reform are doing really well. And so I think, if you look at the big picture, it just feels like what's happening everywhere.
I think Pat McFadden just now talked about the old centrist ad conference. There was a big kind of get-together of Democrats and centre-left governments and stuff on Friday. How are the Democrats doing? Do you ever hear from them these days? What's the deal with them?
They're in a total mess. There is a huge amount of anger towards Donald Trump from people that don't like him and are liberally minded, would-be Democrat voters. But the party, much as we've sometimes seen when political parties here have suffered a really bad defeat, Not that the numbers were that bad, but it's been, it's been catastrophic for them, clearly what's happened. They're in a moment of disarray. The difference over there to British politics that is very striking to me is that there's no mechanism, there's no leader of the opposition, right? After you lose, it's not like here where there'd be a leadership contest and by now, the Democrats, if they were British, they'd have a new leader, setting a direction, like making decisions about, yes, we're going to oppose Trump on this, no, we're not going to let the government shut down, yes, we're going on this policy. Like, that's what a leader of the opposition does. They don't have that in America. So it's a very disunified picture, and if you want to know what the Democrats think about something, who do you ask? I don't know. And you could ask 10 people and they'll give you 10 different things what the Democrats think. And that's not a problem specific to them or to this moment. It's a structural part of American politics. But it's very difficult then for a party in this position to sound like they're automatically unified and they speak with one voice, and which is what the Liberals want. They want a leader to be fighting Donald Trump, and that structure doesn't exist in American politics, and that's making it one of the things that's making it very hard for them.
Yeah, we were talking to people in Labour who have exactly this problem. They don't know who to talk to. They're going on these delegations to DC and kind of meeting a whole spread bet of people just in case one of them might become president in 2028. But, I mean, if we are putting bets on, or, something less kind of financial, who are we supposed to be looking out for?
Yeah,
who are your names? Who are your picks?
Don't put any bets on. Like, you cannot, the idea you could predict who's going to be the Democratic candidate this far out is for the birds. No one would have thought in 2013 as we'd be, that like Donald Trump was going to be the Republican Party candidate in 2016 and win the presidency. Like, these things are much slower burn than that. So we have early front runners, but I couldn't dream of saying that they'll still be the front runners come the primaries. And the primary system itself is very has a geographical aspect to it. The order that they pick makes a big difference. Momentum happens in ways that you wouldn't have expected. So I wouldn't dream of betting on that. All I would say is, we do have some front runners, and Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, has put himself in a position where he is been able to position himself as the voice of resistance to Trump, such as there is one, partly by virtue of Trump having targeted California first for his military incursion, and that helps Newsom to fight back. Partly he has a very effective social media strategy, which none of the others do. Well, that's not true. He has his own one, which has gathered attention. I don't think he's really going to get picked to be the candidate. He has lots of baggage and issues that vary for various reasons. But right now, if you're looking for someone who's standing up and fighting back, if you're a Democrat, and that is what they're desperate for, he is perceived to be doing that, and some of the others not as effectively yet. But like I say, it's far too early to say.
I won't run down to the betting shop.
No.
Do we have a roving mic for Jack, for anyone who wants to ask him any questions about America or other? Don't all shout at once. While people think, I'll ask you, what do you think is going to happen with the midterms?
Well, the midterms is really interesting because the math of that, see, I'm learning.
You're not allowed to do that. You can't do that.
Means that it should be relatively straightforward for the Democrats to win back the House, and it should be very, very difficult for the Democrats to win back the Senate. And that is due to the way that it works, the different districts that happen to be up for election and so on in the Senate, and means that is the most likely, and has always been the most likely outcome. Donald Trump is using gerrymandering to try and avoid that from happening overtly, just plain as in plain sight. The Democrats are now trying to do the same because they're trying to combat it. Extraordinary to my eyes in itself, but that's how it works. I still think it is the most likely scenario that they'll win back the House and not the Senate, but the speed of the news cycle there is so fast. Things change so quickly. So much will happen just between now and the end of the year, let alone through next year. That even that is a difficult call to make at this point. But that is definitely logically the most likely scenario.
Oh, thank you. Have we got any questions? Go on. Yes, we've got one at the back.
I'm afraid it's one of your colleagues. Really interested in, we always hear that the UK doesn't really feature in the kind of minds of US lawmakers, but how much of a character is Nigel Farage? He sort of paints himself as the great mate of Donald Trump.
That's a really good question. He is like, people know who he is in DC. He is definitely a character in DC. The relationship with Trump is absolutely real. So I think it's not overplayed by him. It's a real thing. There's obviously a limit to how much influence he has over Trump's thinking, or you would not see Donald Trump being so close with the Prime Minister, as I was just talking about. So it's not like he, or honestly anyone, has a huge amount of sway over Trump's thinking, but it's definitely a long-standing, strong relationship. Trump values loyalty so much. Farage stood by him through some of his most difficult moments, campaigned for him in 2016 when it was a less fashionable thing to do on the right, and Trump values and remembers that. And the links between the White House and the broad reform project are growing and fascinating to me. I was at a GB News launch event in DC earlier this month, where they opened a bureau there, and Farage was speaking at that, and the White House fully bought into it, sent half the cabinet down. Caroline Levitt, the president's press secretary, was on stage speaking, as were members of the cabinet. Farage was introduced as Britain's next prime minister, and you could see, like I say, it wasn't a reform event, it was a GB News event, but obviously, you know, he works there, right? So like, the ties were real, and you could see bonds being built, and clearly the White House had decided to put its weight behind this venture. That to me was really interesting, and I think that is something that is going to be worth watching over the next few years, and maybe, you know, even more closely after 2029, depending on how that goes. But you know, that is definitely a real thing, and if I was still in Britain, I would be watching that just as closely as I am over there.
Yeah, because there's also this reformy think tank. They're called the Centre for a Better Britain, and they're sort of going off and seeking MAGA funding in DC. They're trying to get their money into the coffers, and then they'll influence reform policy and all that sort of thing. So is there a lot of not just the big characters like Farage and Trump, like all the backroom fixers are talking to each other and stuff too?
Some of them definitely are, and I don't know about the group you're describing, but I could imagine that working. Because there's a lot of money in politics in DC, and there's a lot of love on the MAGA right for what broadly that Farage's project is over here, and so I wouldn't be surprised to see that as successful.
There was this idea going around maybe a year and a half ago that Farage was out of favour, you know, Trump wouldn't talk to him, that he was sort of sitting away from him in the rallies and stuff. That seems to have gone away, right?
I think, was that a British idea?
Possibly, and maybe not all British ideas are right.
The British coverage of Britain and America is often overestimates how much Americans give a shit, honestly. Like, that's one of the things that you realise when you get there. I remember there were a lot of stories when Mandelson was nominated that, Trump was going to step in and block this guy. It's like the idea that Donald Trump really knew or cared who was going to be the ambassador to Washington when he'd just come back into the White House, and he was busy scything up the government and doing all these incredible things all at once, and he's going to be spending his time thinking about Peter Mandelson's, it's just, but over here it was a story every day, and always, they're definitely going to block it, and it's it just wasn't on the radar, and it was not in the conversation, and why would it be? And so I think, there's an element of that in a lot of these stories.
Well, if you believe Donald Trump, he's never met Peter Mandelson in his life, apparently.
Go.
So,
I saw them on TV together.
I think he stood over his shoulder and they praised the beautiful accent. Has anyone praised your beautiful accent?
You do get a lot of comments about your accent. Yes, you do actually. Americans are quite obsessed with British accents. People think that you're clever, which is great, and they enjoy hearing you speak, even if you're from Stockport. And no one's ever praised the Stockport accent before. So it's actually quite a tool if you're a journalist over there.
Excellent. Well, Jack, thanks very much for coming in.
Thank you for having me. Isn't this awesome? I've been at Politico such a long time, and I remember when it was Kate and me and Annabelle and one or two other people, and it was we would struggle. We'd have an event in a tiny little pub miles away from conference. To see us create, I've never seen anything like this in conference before. To see us build our own pub and have Prime Minister in here watching football. I mean, it's this is fun. I'm going to be in here all night.
Excellent.
But I'm not working tonight. So.
I don't know what time it shuts. What time does
When's
it shut?
last orders, guys?
Yeah. 9:30.
We'll probably get a few in, can't we?
Yeah. Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks for coming. Do stick around. All right. Thank
Cheers.
you, Dan.